1947년 이스라엘의 유대 광야에서 양떼를 돌보던 베두인 소년이 잃어버린 양을 찾기 위해서 계곡을 여기저기 헤매고 다니다가 작은 동굴을 발견하게 됩니다. 그리고 그 안에 혹시나 잃어버린 양이 있을까 해서 돌을 안으로 던졌는데 나오라는 양은 나오지 않고 그 안에서 항아리 깨지는 아주 둔탁한 소리를 듣게 되죠. 호기심 많은 이 베두인 소년이 동굴 안으로 들어갔을 때 그 동굴 안에는 누군가가 써놓은 아주 오래된 두루마리를 발견하게 됩니다. 이렇게 해서 세상에 이제 알려지게 된 이 두루마리, 결국은 이제 고고학자 손에 들어가게 됐는데, 고고학자들이 이 두루마리를 보는 순간 깜짝 놀라지 않을 수가 없었습니다. 왜냐면은 비록 많이 좀 훼손되긴 했지만 그래도 그 유대 광야의 건조한 날씨 때문에 크게 손상되지 않고 그대로 보관되어 있는 이 두루마리의 내용을 보니까 구약 성경의 이사야서 전권인 66장의 말씀들이 빼곡히 기록되어 있는 것을 보게 되죠. 그리고는 고고학자들은 또다시 그 동굴 주변을 여기저기를 막 돌아다니면서 발굴 작업을 하게 되는데, 그 뒤에도 약 11개의 동굴에서 이사야서뿐만 아니라 시편과 또 여러 가지 문서들을 발견하게 됩니다. 과연 이렇게 이사야서를 비롯해서 시편 그리고 여러 가지 이 두루마리들을 적고 또 그 동굴에다가 보관한 사람들은 과연 누구일까? 이것이 학계에서 큰 관심이었는데, 바로 그 옆에 SNF라고 하는 사람들이 살던 공동체의 그 흔적들이 또다시 발견되면서 아마도 이 동굴 속에, 여러 동굴 속에서 발견된 이사야서뿐만 아니라 여러 개의 그 두루마리의 글들을 쓴 주인공들이 바로 SNF 사람들이 아닐까라는 것이 기존의 학자들의 의견이었고, 또 그렇게들 많이 알고 있었죠. 그러나 사실은 그곳에서 발견된 여러 그 두루마리들이 SNF파가 다 쓴 것은 아니다, 다른 또 누군가가 있다라고 이렇게 또 주장하시는 분이 있습니다. 바로 이스라엘에서도 굉장히 고고학적으로도 유명하시고 또 특히 사회사본에 대해서는 일가견이 있는 아주 최고 권위자이시기도 하죠. 이스라엘 예루살렘에 있는 홀리랜드 대학의 총장님이신 스티븐 판 총장님과 함께 오늘은 흥미롭게 이스라엘의 유대 광야, 특히 쿰란 동굴에서 발견된 여러 가지 이 두루마리 성경에 대한 이야기를 좀 들어보도록 하겠습니다. Hello, thank you.
Okay.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you very much for enjoying.
이번에 이제 총장님께서 한국에 방문하신 이유가 얼마 전에 그 사회사본에 대한 그 심포지움을 한국에서 하셨어요. 사회사본, 제가 조금 전에 1947년도에 유대 광야에서 발견된 것이다라고 얘기를 했지만 사회사본에 대해서 좀 자세하게 설명을 해 주시죠.
And that was with the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's rather needs an explanation, and that is that they are found to be scrolls, written documents that were put into caves to be kept from other people. Could be soldiers, it could be other thieves that are around. And in this case, at least a good part of it is part of a group who actually had a calling to God to be out in the wilderness to prepare the way of the Lord, as it was in the book of Isaiah. The Dead Sea Scrolls that we found or have come, in fact, there were times that in the time of the maybe 8th century that they found some scrolls in the area of Jericho, they said. It isn't that it was just these, but it was most of them were there, and from 11 different caves that were found. And it was taken for granted that all of those 11 caves that had different quantities of scrolls, that they were from the same group. Well, that's also could be difficult. The first of the 11 caves, the 11th cave that they found was from Jerusalem, and it was talking about how you work in the temple. If you have to work on having a new temple, then how to put it together. And this was a priestly cave because it's giving them all the kinds of hymns that they have to be able to function. Then coming back from there, then you have just to the north of that, there is a a place that is called, we call it the third cave, and it's the place where the copper scroll was found, as to where you should be able to find all the things that came out of the temple. And it turns out that out of the, I speak of 11 caves that were coexisting more or less within 50 years of one another, a lot were gathered together and put in these caves as they rushed away for the Romans are coming or something else, and they hid them in the caves. But these were, again, about 50 years apart, and they belonged to laity and priests in one case, and laity and priests in the other caves. So you go back and forth, that you have those that came down from Jerusalem and those that were there still from the Essenes. When they had to leave, and the other group came in. And so as we look at these more carefully, there were actually at least maybe 5 different groups that were there, and even more when you count Masada, further about 70 miles down to the south of. And so there's so much that was going on that made a lot of these different groups angry with one another. They had different people, different ones that were ahead of them. And why did they go? About half of them were in their place that when they were found, because of the fact that the Romans were coming after them. And so some were not from the temple. There was a great deal of confusion that was going on. But it's during all that time in which we find that most of the New Testament had come into being, you see. There was one group from the first cave that was there, or they had it for a decade before it came to pass. So we had this time where they had a great time working on what came in that one cave. And then the cave 11 came in. That was not too far away from it. And all these other things started coming in. And all these different good scholars were thinking that they were all from one cave or one group. Turns out in the end that they weren't all from the same. One was from the group that was up in Jerusalem, and a lot of repetitions in it. And then it was also going on out in the area of from everywhere from Jericho, going all the way down to Masada. Talk about another, maybe almost 100 miles away. You have all these different ones coming through from the Bar Kokhba period, from the time of the when other personal documents were being written and in caves. They all had their reasons, and in that case, we did have good reason to go ahead and just study it. I mean, it wasn't all the same. These were all groups. I had to go through and look at them and say, wait a minute, the handwriting isn't the same on this one as it was on that one. I had to take it into neutron activation analysis and all these other types of things, carbon-14, to see if they're in the same, the fragments should be in the same one. They thought that maybe they had 700 scrolls all the time. By the time we looked at it, and there were fragments of other manuscripts, but the same manuscript type. And going through all this, we are now over 1,000 scrolls that have been found in the caves that we didn't know about before. So they were there. First, when that was built, the Shrine of the Book, the area that was around the caves, the place where the rest of those were found and put into a museum, what they call the Rockefeller Museum.
예루살렘에 가면은 이스라엘 박물관이라고 있어요. 이스라엘 뮤지엄에 가면은 사해 사본만 따로 전시해 놓는 사해 사본관이 있습니다. 저도 거기를 이제 여러 번 가봤는데 그 안에 들어가면 이제 어두컴컴해서 정말로 이 7m짜리 사해 사본 두루마리가 이제 쫙 전시되어 있는 걸 이렇게 봤어요. 그 안에는 막 사진도 못 찍게 하고 굉장히 그 감시를 철저하게 하길래 저는 그 이스라엘 뮤지엄에 있는 두루마리가 진품인 줄 알았는데 알고 보니까 그것도 진품이 아니고 모조품이라고 그러더라고요. 진품은 따로 숨겨놨다 이렇게 얘기를 하던데 그만큼 진품에 접근하기가 쉽지 않다는 얘기겠지만 그래도 총장님은 이스라엘 그 박물관에서 이렇게 특별히 이렇게 접근할 수 있도록 하겠지만 그만큼 이스라엘에서 이 사해 사본에 대해서 연구하는 게 쉽지 않을 것 같은데 총장님은 어쩌다가 이렇게 사해 사본에 대해서 깊은 관심을 갖고 집중적으로 연구를 하시게 됐습니까?
So that was what really drew me in. When I was in Bible college back in the States, I saw pictures of people over a bunch of scrolls on a table. And when I saw that in my education back then in Santa Cruz, California, I thought to myself, boy, I just wish that I could be there to see those sometime. And so it happened. And both I was able to be brought in because of my interest in the Dead Sea Scrolls for some years before, and it all came true.
예수님 당시에 그 이스라엘의 유대교 안에 바리새파, 또 사두개파, 에세네파 이렇게 크게 이제 세 개의 파가 있었어요. 우리가 좀 이해하기 쉽도록 그 바리새파, 또 사두개파, 에세네파 어떤 차이가 있는지 설명을 좀 해주시죠.
There were about 4 different groups during the time of the 2nd century BC, the 1st century, and also during the time of Jesus and his disciples, in which they had come from coming back from Babylon. The Pharisees grew out of that, and they were considered to be very strong on their principles. The actual Zadokites or the Sadducees, they also were committed to doing things just as they had been in the years past. They didn't always get along with one another, and they set up a table in Jerusalem. The Essenes were another question, that why are they drawing people, and why is there so much interest in the Bible and in the language that they could have come back with in Greek or something else, but it was in Hebrew. And so all of these together had different groups in different places. And that was something that brought a lot to our attention because of the fact that it also has sometimes things that are not only of interest for Judaism, and it definitely was. They didn't write much in anything else but Hebrew. And it gives us the real language as to how things would have looked like in a scroll that there was in Jesus and his disciples that were the ones that they could feed on. And the only reason why these survived after many years of times together, baptizing and having more groups out in the wilderness, similar to John the Baptist. This drew people to have a real proper way of having a practical life, ones that had more of a gifting in the Holy Spirit. A lot of these things were already there, and in good health. They had various miraculous things that went on in their midst, and in several different caves. So these are the differences that we have. And all of this was happening up to the time just before Jesus and his disciples appeared on the scene.
그러면 예수님께서 결국 이제 그 세례 요한한테 세례를 받으시는데 침례를 받으시는데 예수님께서 사두개파나 또 바리새파가 아니라 굳이 이 에세네파에 가서 이렇게 그 세례를 받았다라는 것은 그럼 예수님도 에세네파의 일원이었다라고 이렇게 얘기해도 무방합니까?
On the contrary, from a lot of scholars that are around today, they like to think that Jesus was some of them that he was in the Pharisaic line and things like this. Scholars thinking such things. But that isn't really what it's I don't think it could be taken that way, because if that's the case, then John the Baptist was also a follower of the Pharisees, and that's not true. So there's a number of things that really drives us to coming back to the story with John the Baptist being down, possibly an actual disciple of the Essenes in a way, and sometimes going out to do some baptizing and whatnot. And that was something that was truly a place in our understanding of Christianity that this is found there. But you can see in the different Gospels clear understandings from John the Baptist that people were rebuked to be behaving themselves properly in a certain way. And that drew them into following John. And also that's what happened with Jesus and then his disciples.
총장님께서는 사회사본이 SNF파 공동체의 단독 작품이 아니라 다른 공동체도 작업을 일부 했을 것이다. 이렇게 생각하시는 그 근거로 달력을 얘기하셨어요. 그 근거로 달력이라고 이렇게 생각하시는 그 이유는 뭡니까?
They didn't all have the same calendars to work by. So your feasts were not at the same time. That was back at the time when Jesus was around and before him. That's what was going on in Judaism before the temple was destroyed.
총장님의 그런 주장에 대해서 이스라엘의 고고학자들의 반응은 어떻습니까? 굉장히 놀라는 반응입니까? 아니면 말도 안 된다 하고 이렇게 받아들이지 않는 그런 상황입니까?
Yes, there's several different groups. I was back in the 1980s, going into the 90s, very interested in these same questions. And when it came down to whether or not they were of any interest or not, whether there was any thing that was correct or incorrect in Josephus's work on it, or the New Testament, as people would like to say otherwise. But it's simply not an easy thing to work through. And so with many scholars all around coming up with ideas as to who was where at what time during that time, there was real struggle from all of those who were in at that time seeing all these new things. They thought that they were all from the same group. And we had to entangle all of that in order to come up with something that was clear and really encouraging about how was it that we came up with the books that we have today.
오늘 총장님하고 이렇게 사회사본에 관한 이야기를 나누다 보니까 제가 마치 2000년 전에 유대 광야, 쿰난 공동체에 와 있는 듯한 그런 착각이 들 정도로 아주 오늘 생생하게 얘기를 잘 해주셨습니다. 나중에는 이스라엘에서 유대 광야에서 한번 만나서 직접 그 쿰난 동굴에 대한 설명을 듣는 시간이 있었으면 좋겠습니다.
I doubt that you wouldn't come.
Thank you very much.
Okay.